Women. Today we're talking about women. The women behind a great figure. After all, there's a popular saying that behind every great man, there's always a great woman. I don't really like that saying because I believe that women are never behind men, but rather beside them, having an equal relationship. In fact, it should be said that many times there have been capable, intelligent, and sharp women who managed to surpass the male ideal, establishing themselves as much stronger personalities than the men they were with. Today we're talking about women, but not just any women. Today we're talking about the women of the Italian dictator par excellence, the women of Benito Mussolini, and we're going to discover something truly unique, something exceptional beyond all imagination. And think of how many books have been written. One of the most interesting is by my colleague Roberto Festorazzi, Mussolini e le sue donne, published by Pietro Macchione. It's a 284-page book that delves into this sometimes morbid relationship Mussolini had throughout his life with the fairer sex. According to some observers, perhaps not very attentive ones, Mussolini was nothing more than a sexual predator, a man obsessed with replicating his reputation for power and strength, even in the bedroom. According to my colleague Festorazzi, that's not the case. Mussolini simply sought, yes, sometimes for payment, but not only that. He was seeking indulgence, protection. He was looking for that maternal figure that had always been somewhat missing in his life. First and foremost, he was looking for a female figure who, each time, was actually able not only to satisfy his carnal desires, but also to give him security, to give him peace of mind, to make him feel pampered, protected, appreciated in every way. Mussolini was looking for reassurance, those reassurances that he had found in several women, each time very different from one another. Let's think about Rachele, his wife, Rachele Guidi, whom he basically met just a few steps from home. After all, both Mussolini and Rachele Guidi were originally from Predappio in Romagna. They grew up just a few steps away from each other's homes. Benito Mussolini's own father, Alessandro, after becoming a widower, had opened a tavern in Forlì on Giovettonante Street. And here he met Rachele Guidi's mother and had a relationship with her. At the time, Benito was in Switzerland, but when he returned to Forlì, he met Rachele and started a relationship with her, which was initially opposed by both families, who didn't approve. That relationship, passionate but also very tumultuous, would last practically until the end. Rachele Guidi knew about her husband's many lovers, a husband whom she had married twice, first in a civil ceremony on December 16, 1915, and then in a religious ceremony on December 28, 1925, when Mussolini was already the dictator. Rachele herself had taken revenge on her husband by having a relationship with Corrado Veroli, the manager of a property that had belonged to Mussolini himself. And that tumultuous relationship, made up of arguments, slaps, plates flying from the cupboard, shouting, but then they would always make up, even during the worst times, even in the most difficult moments. And Mussolini had many difficult moments, even with his women. We've already met one of them. We dedicated a video to her a few months ago. Margherita Sarfatti, the Venetian woman of Jewish origin, cultured, extremely intelligent, able to introduce Mussolini to elite salons and bring him into Italian high society at the time, with her, who had basically shaped Mussolini as a politician. The relationship with Margherita Sarfatti was multifaceted. There was, clearly, the sexual aspect, but above all, there was the relationship with high society, of which Margherita was the ambassador, the relationship with literature. Margherita was also a refined literary figure, and the relationship with politics. Many of Mussolini's political connections came about thanks to Margherita Sarfatti. Then she gradually slipped into oblivion, also out of convenience, and was eventually left to herself. But we've already told her story. But Margherita wasn't the only lover of the Duce. Before her, there was Ida Dalser, a girl from Trentino, and probably the biggest skeleton in Mussolini's closet. Why? Because Ida Dalser, who later ended up in an asylum where she died, had a son with Benito Mussolini. She named him Benito Albino. And for a long time in the 1920s, she tried to force Mussolini to acknowledge that son. The ambushes in the streets, and even worse, the attempts to enter the halls of power to be recognized as Mussolini's true wife and the mother of his son, had caused some embarrassing incidents. Perhaps for this very reason, Mussolini eventually made the decision, not so much to make her literally disappear, as people said, but to have her committed to a mental asylum, using the excuse that the woman suffered from schizophrenia and paranoid delusions. It was necessary to keep the secret about that difficult, embarrassing, and dangerous relationship, something that could undermine the political career of a rising Mussolini in the 1920s. Ida Dalzer, the unfortunate lover of Benito Mussolini, simply had to stop existing and, above all, stop bothering the dictator. But she wasn't the only lover who was seduced and abandoned. Let's think of Bianca Ceccato, who worked as a secretary in the editorial office of Popolo d'Italia. She too was taken to bed by Mussolini, and according to some biographers, was even the victim of a sexual assault in the newsroom. She too is said to have had a child who was never acknowledged. Or other women, Magda Brard, Alice de Fonseca, Romilda Ruspi, women who from time to time had slept with Mussolini, but only very briefly. He sought them out, they yielded to him, but then they had to disappear. Because after all, Mussolini, especially after 1929, after signing the Lateran Pacts with the Vatican, could not appear either in public or within the inner circle of power as a polygamist. How? A satyr who jumped from one bed to another. He had to present himself as an upstanding statesman, devoted to his family. A large family because Rachele Guidi gave him 5 children. The eldest, Etta, was conceived out of wedlock and was only recognized later. Then Vittorio, a boy destined for a career not only in cinema, but also in politics. When Mussolini, his father, was overthrown, Vittorio fled to Germany, setting up the first fascist government in exile. Then Bruno, the most unfortunate son, the most athletic one, passionate about sports and aviation, was destined to die in 1941 in an accident during a test flight. Romano, the longest-lived son, died in 2006. A piano genius, a great artist, a top jazz musician, perhaps among all Mussolini's children. He is the one who is truly remembered most fondly, a memory not tied to the burdensome surname he bore, but to his art, to his ability to enchant, to his gift for shaping music in every note, making theater audiences fall in love and letting them imagine his life through music. And finally, Anna Maria Mussolini, who was also unfortunate because she developed breast cancer and contracted chickenpox during her hospital stay in 1968. And in the end, she died of endocarditis. These were Mussolini's official children, but then there were others. As we said, there was Benito Albino, there was the son of Bianca Ceccato, who disappeared without a trace. There was Elena, the daughter he had with Angela Curti Cucciati, another of Mussolini's major mistresses. According to my colleague Festerazzi in his book, Mussolini is said to have had between 8 and 10 children, either acknowledged or unacknowledged, outside of marriage. Many of these were not recognized, or in any case, they remained in the shadows. Precisely because the dictator's sins could not be known, they were not supposed to be discovered. A dictator who, in order to appear strong, authoritative, and respected, had to keep his personal misdeeds extremely private. And then there was her, Claretta, Clara Petacci, the woman who would share her fate with Mussolini until the very end. Well, after basically ending his relationship with Margherita Sarfatti, Clara Petacci became Mussolini's official lover. Everyone knew it, even at Palazzo Venezia. Rachele knew it too, and she could hardly swallow that bitter pill. Mussolini continued to see Petacci, even after marrying her off to Riccardo Federici in 1934, guaranteeing her protection, wealth, and also comforts for herself and her entire family, giving the Petacci family the opportunity to move to Villa Camilleri in Lucca, in the Monte Mario area of Rome, giving them the chance to have comforts the rest of the Italian population didn't have. Inside Villa Torlonia, the villa that was Mussolini's residence, the villa where Mussolini would be arrested by order of the king following the night meeting of July 25, 1943. Inside Villa Torlonia, there was the alcove, the love nest of Claretta and Benito, a bedroom with walls and a ceiling, covered with mirrors, pink furniture, a bathroom in black marble with a large mosaic bathtub. We can only imagine the two of them, intent on cuddling, loving each other, while everything around them was falling apart. When Mussolini loses power, when he is arrested, clearly the Petacci family also gets into trouble. Claretta herself is also arrested on July 25, 1943. Released on September 8, she moves to northern Italy, where the German troops are, where the Italian Social Republic is established. Her new residence is in Gardone Riviera, not far from Salo, where Mussolini sets up the seat of his government. In Gardone Riviera, Claretta Petacci is not alone. She is watched day and night by an SS officer, Franz Spogler. That's his name. Why? Because Karl Wolff, the commander of the SS in Italy, doesn't trust either Petacci or Mussolini. He wants to have full access to any information that might leak, even from their romantic encounters day and night. After all, the SS are no strangers to this kind of operation. The security service, the Sicherheitsdienst, had organized the famous Salon Kitty in Berlin many years earlier, a luxury brothel for high-ranking officers and ministers. It was populated by prostitutes directly controlled by the Sicherheitsdienst, with microphones placed in every room. The same method had been replicated by Wolff through his man, Spogler, in Gardone. From that moment on, Claretta Petacci would never be left alone, even though she kept visiting her Benito in Salo, even as she occasionally moved with him to Milan, where she eventually decided to settle, always under the close watch of the SS. Until April 27, 1945. The desperate journey to Switzerland, the capture at Dongo, not far from the border, the partisans of the 52nd Garibaldi Brigade, the brave ones who intercept the column of German vehicles. When they inspect them, they find Mussolini clumsily disguised as a German army corporal, and they find her too. The death of Claretta Petacci, who according to reconstructions throws herself onto Mussolini while the partisans' machine guns fire at Mezzegra on Lake Como. We know her story, just as we know about the display of her corpse together with that of her lover and other leaders at Piazzale Loreto, hanged by their feet from the roof of a gas station, where previously in the same way, partisans had been hanged. Claretta Petacci becomes, despite herself, the symbol of the dictator's vice. Perhaps it is precisely the display of that body that makes Italians understand that unmentionable secret of Mussolini, that Mussolini himself had kept hidden for over 15 years. All his women, his lovers, his secret affairs, everything he couldn't admit in public. At that moment, with the display of Claretta Petacci's corpse, a veil full of hypocrisy is lifted. But our story doesn't end here, because she remains, Rachele Guidi, who after the war is confined along with her children Romano and Anna Maria to Ischia. She stays there until 1949. She is later authorized to return home to Forlì, and from Forlì, Rachele Guidi initially travels back and forth to Riccione, to the Riviera, taking over the management of the guest house in Rome, where she stands out for a dish she invented which she offers to tourists, black shirt spaghetti. Yes, I know, all this might make you smile, but it's a matter of record, it's historical truth. In 1957, the Italian government, with an act that might seem purely magnanimous, but was actually the result of political calculation. That is, out of the need to obtain external votes from the Italian social movement, as we were saying, the Italian government decided to hand over the remains of her husband to Rachele Guidi. After the killing and the desecration at Piazzale Loreto, he had been buried in an unmarked grave, precisely to prevent commemorations. Rachele decided to bury Mussolini's remains in Predappio, and besides, it was close by, since she went to live at Villa Carpena in Forlì. From that moment on, as we know, Predappio became a destination for those nostalgic for fascism. Rachele Mussolini, until her death, never denied either her relationship with her husband or her political beliefs. Even though her main concern was always to protect her children, those children who meant everything to her. She hadn't managed to raise them all the way she would have liked. She hadn't been able to save Bruno from the accident, nor Anna Maria from illness. However, she had become indifferent towards her son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano. Even though he had married her eldest daughter, Etta, Rachele Guidi was against granting clemency to Ciano at the Verona trial. This caused a very serious rift between the eldest daughter and her mother, an irreparable rift. Etta, a long time later, would describe her mother as the real dictator of the house. She would say, "My father, yes, he had harsh, difficult ways, but the one who really ruled the house with an iron fist was my mother, Rachele." Rachele Guidi passed away in 1979 on October 30th, 1979 to be exact, and behind her, by having herself buried in the family crypt at the Predappio Cemetery, she leaves behind the memory, perhaps, of the only woman, not just who knew how to love, but who truly knew how to understand Benito Mussolini completely. She did not have Dalser's ambitions. She did not try to manipulate Mussolini like Sarfatti did. She had no hesitation in accepting her husband's unfaithful extramarital affairs, knowing that, in the end, he would always come back to her. She had also accepted, in the end, with a hint of resignation, the relationship with Claretta, who apparently had taken her husband away from her. But in reality, according to Rachele Guidi herself, it had only been a long-lasting distraction, but nothing more. Because Mussolini had no children with Claretta, but he had 5 with Rachele, and that, for Rachele Guidi, represented the true legacy of a tormented but very long-lasting love. Today, looking back at the past, at Mussolini, beyond his political or military sphere, looking at his more intimate side, and his relationships with women. As mentioned, we could define him as a sexual predator, a man obsessed with women, but ultimately obsessed with all the women in his life. His wife Rachele, Margherita Sarfatti, Ida Dalser, Bianca Ceccato, Angela Curti Cucciati, Magda Brard, Alice de Fonseca, Romilda Ruspi, and Claretta Petacci. He expected only understanding and kindness, and those feminine qualities that we might associate more with a mother than with a lover. Mussolini wanted to feel reassured by his women, appreciated for who he was and for what he did, as if he always seemed to lack something, as if he lacked approval, as if he lacked that intimate certainty of being not just a dictator, but also a man in the true sense of the word. The weaknesses of someone who outwardly seems rock solid and absolutely certain of himself are sometimes so deep that they only emerge after his death. This is the case with Mussolini, about whom much was said during his life, but even more became known after his passing. And perhaps this still helps us to truly understand his psyche, which was complex and, in some ways, even fascinating. Today we know that Mussolini, the man who wanted to change Italy, the man who wanted to transform Italy not only into a personal dictatorship, but into a power far greater than its own strength. He had an inherent weakness. He needed the support of several women. To truly feel complete, he needed to surround himself with the affection of many women. Only then could he truly call himself the master of Italy, but even more so, the master of himself.